I'm delighted to welcome Beth-Ann Smith to the business studio. Hiya, Beth-Ann.
Hi, Alec. How are you?
Fantastic. Gosh, there's loads to talk about there, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm afraid I'm going to torture you now a bit and do something which I do for all my guests. I take you back on a trip down memory lane about your last year in school. Were you the academic, the person who wanted to travel? What was going on in your mind?
Well, it's funny, Alec. As I said to you a while ago, I was quite academic in school. I mean, not at the top, but I always got my grades. So I worked hard for my leaving cert, and I got a good leaving cert. But I do think, I suppose, inside there was a creative yearning to get out, and so once I got to college, that started kicking in, and so it seemed like I was going down a very academic route, and then I broke out and went down a more creative route as time went by.
Yes, you were telling me that you spent 4 years in Trinity. I mean, in business and politics, my goodness me. How did you manage that for somebody from the creative world?
Well, I hadn't quite recognized my creative streak just yet. I realized that I didn't quite fit. And I realized that I wasn't paying as much attention as I should pay, from having gone from quite a swotty kid to college, where I kind of I suppose I was having a fabulous time, but I wasn't quite ready. And then I went down, I suppose then I went down a little bit of a conventional route afterwards, went into banking and stockbroking, as you know, and but within those moments, I knew that I was creative, as I started then doing lots of creative stuff on the side, like, as you said, presenting a radio show and window display and catering and anything I could do that was creative. And then finally, of course, as you know, I went fully down the creative route, so into cooking, which I loved. But it took a while for me to just fully absorb that I wasn't a fit down that traditional route.
Yes, I mean, you have to experience life to understand where you do fit. But you decided to take a trip abroad, and it wasn't Australia, which would be the usual thing for a lot of the Irish at the time.
Well, yeah, actually, and everybody who finished college at the same time as me, they seem to be all going to Sydney and saying, "Come to Sydney with us." And I was like, "I've just spent 4 years with you guys." So I went to Barcelona. And I taught English for a year. I learned Spanish. I fully immersed myself in the culture, and it was just life-changing. I mean, I'll never forget it. You know those years in your life where everything changes in terms of your perspective and how you see everything. That for me was a real life changer, actually. And I loved being in Europe. There's such a different feeling to living in Central Europe for a year. So that was unbelievably wonderful.
It's one of the challenges I think parents face, it just as an aside now, and as a mother yourself, letting the apron strings go, letting your children travel. People seem to be becoming more cautious about letting people discover the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a shame. I think kids need to. I think it's really important to, we're on it. We have this wonderful little island that we live in, but it is a little island, and we can think that we're the center of the universe. But if you live somewhere else, you realize how much more there is around. And I think it's really good for your mind, for development, for learning about other cultures, and even learn to look at your own culture a little bit more objectively. So I think it's a fantastic experience. So I would certainly be encouraging my son, as much as I would miss him terribly, I would definitely encourage a bit of traveling.
I mean, you were telling me also that you were the square peg in the round hole of banking and stockbroking.
Yes, no, for sure. I mean, again, I suppose I kind of fell into those roles kind of with the assumption that I'd be good at them, and I realized that they just tortured me, those jobs, and I probably tortured everybody around me in those jobs, because I was all on the side, radio presenting, doing all sorts of anything creative, and really looking at all these figures on pages, going like, oh my God, I hate this. I hate looking at figures on pages. I've got better at it, by the way, but it wasn't a fit. And going in every day to do those kind of jobs, it just didn't work. And as you said earlier, you could spend your life in those roles and not kind of be honest enough with yourself to know. But I really knew, and it took me a while to get out of it, but I did know, and I was so happy to leave, and I'm sure everybody else in those jobs were happy for me to leave as well, because I was, I was just wrongly placed, and then not doing as well as I could be doing, because I shouldn't have been there in the first place. So, but you learn, right? You learn, you know, if I was ever in another role like that I didn't like, I wouldn't take that long to get out of it again.
Well, I mean, that's the great, part of modern day life. So many people in the past sort of spent their whole lives doing work really they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
You have to be brave, I think.
You do. And it was really funny. I remember at the time, everybody saying to me, you're so brave, you're so brave. And I was like, I don't have a choice. Like, this is not a choice. This is, I have to leave. But it is interesting that I think a lot of people feel that they have no choice in those situations. And they take years or something like COVID to go, oh, actually, I've been miserable for 20 years, and it's important. You only get one shot at life, right? So it's important to make it as happy as you can and be as well placed as you can in terms of what you do or where you want to live, or what it is that you want in your life. So yeah.
Well, you had an inkling of what you wanted to do, so you took the bull by the horns and you went into the whole world of catering and cookery. How did that start?
Well, it was a brilliantly fantastic moment when I found myself incidentally and wonderfully in the family way, as they say, without expecting to be in the family way. And I was suddenly in Dublin going, do you know what? I've always, my whole family had always been in food for 6 generations. They'd been in food. I'd always been obsessed with food. And I'd always been obsessed with the idea of doing Ballymaloe, and suddenly I was pregnant with my son going, I'm going to do Ballymaloe right now. And Darina was really kind because the course was full and she made a space for me. So I went in from when I was 3 months to 6 months pregnant. I subsequently had a baby that was born of butter, who eats everything also. But I had the most amazing 3 months of my life. And again, another life-changing moment for me was that time when I did the course, and every single day was wonderful. I learned so much. Rachel and Rory obviously taught as well, and they were awesome. And it was just an incredible time. And it just gave me such an understanding of food and good ingredients and, just a good food ethos. So I absolutely loved it. And then from there, I went into chefing and catering. So it was just wonderful.
Okay, so you've started picking up the experience. Chef and catering, tell us a bit more about that. How did you get involved, or where did you go to get your foot really on the rung of the ladder?
Well, it's funny because I didn't really do any chefing in restaurants. I did chefing in lots of houses around here. So I started in Ballymaloe House, Lismore Castle, a place called Strandcally Castle, various places around Lismore. And I realized that, because I had a small baby, that I didn't have time to go to a restaurant, and
sure.
And that would have probably been in Cork. So I did it was all private chefing. And I absolutely loved it. And then I worked with various chefs who had huge experience under their belt. And that was amazing because I learned from them, but in kitchens that weren't the crazy kitchens doing, 200 covers at lunchtime kind of thing. So I started doing that, and then I started a catering company off the back of that. And so side by side, I had this, and just, obviously I needed a chefing experience to be a caterer. But it's amazing how, because I was so comfortable in my skin in cooking and chefing, really quickly my confidence came up to a good confidence level, and I anytime I was working with anybody who had experience, I was literally like, show me what to do, how are you doing that, what are you doing, like absorbing like a sponge. You're in the right place when you start doing that, right? When you're like at night going to bed with like a stack of cookery books by my bed every single night. So that was amazing.
Well, as you know, they say, if you can monetize a hobby, you'll never work a day in your life.
It's totally true, actually. And you know what I mean, and chefing was hard work for sure, but I absolutely loved it, and I mean, certainly there was moments when weeks and weeks and weeks when I would do 120-hour weeks, very long hours. And it was hard, but I do think every job can be hard, but if you're doing what you love, it's joyful, actually, even when it's hard. It's hard, exhausting, but it's not hard in the sense of when it's a struggle in terms of what you're doing, what you don't like. So I loved my years chefing and catering. It was amazing.
If you were to kind of think back to Ballymaloe, what were the sort of key things you took, apart from the love of food and that and understanding of it? But you would have seen systems in place and good practices and all of those sort of things.
Well, I think, like, for me, the thing that really stands out is you know, they would have such an ethos in terms of using seasonal vegetables and fruits, and using the best quality organic where you can, and treating your suppliers properly. You know, there was just a very good ethos and value system, but using the best quality, and then supporting the people who are producing those really good quality, let's say they were cheeses or organic vegetables. So for me, it's just, and it's really simple. And I do think food is really simple, and celebrating the simplicity of it. So, you know, if tomatoes and basil are in season, a beautiful tomato and basil salad is probably one of the most joyful things on the planet, you know, so it doesn't have to be all gels and foams. It's, you know, you celebrate it, you know. And I saw so many times over the years, and I've been to so many restaurants, because I mean, I literally am obsessed with food, but I sometimes see, you know, these amazing Michelin star chefs hiding behind these foams and gels. And I'm like, but where's the beetroot that I ordered? I can't even see it. Yeah. And they forget the beauty and the simplicity in the beetroot that's just been picked from the garden. And that should be just, you know, shaved into a salad or whatever it should be done. So for me, it's the celebrating the simplicity and the seasonality of food, and then not wasting as well, you know. So it's all the ethos, as a rounded ethos, was really wonderful.
And I suppose really a connection with nature, which would feed in very much into the creativity side.
Totally. And I mean, moving out from, you know, from Dublin, where, and I love nature, and but I was always wearing Dublin. I never got to see the stars at night. I was living on the Canal Basin. There was no birds where I lived, and I'd come home to Cork, to my mum's house, and I'd hear bird song, and I used to be like, oh, the bird song, and I, you know, living in Ballymaloe for that 3 months was because you were so immersed in nature, and you're on an organic farm, and there's beautiful sunrises and sunsets, and I knew I needed to be in the countryside. I just knew that was also part of my next journey, you know, cooking and chefing, living in the country, and darting up and down to Dublin, which I love doing, but not living there anymore. I just needed to clock out from that part of my life. And it's been amazing. So I live in the countryside now with, you know, there's no light pollution, the stars are magnificent. So yeah, that connection with nature is quite wonderful and soul soothing, you know. So yes, I love that as well.
Great, you're getting the best of all worlds there. In terms of sort of the private catering, what were the sort of lessons you took away from that in terms of dealing with people's particular needs, and also just dealing with people?
It's really interesting, because private chefing is really interesting. So at the start, when I knew very little, you know, I would say yes to everything, and then go, oh, how am I going to do that? And then I learned to be able to say no in a really good way, like in a positive way, to say, not but say no, but to say, well, look, this is not going to be possible, but we can do this and this, or we can do that next week, but we can't do it now because we can't get the ingredients or whatever it was. So but you do, you know, I mean, when I was in Lismore Castle, for example, they would rent it out to Americans every week, and they'd come in their private jets, and there'd be kind of vegans, there'd be lactose free, there'd be anaphylactics, there'd be, you know, the whole thing. And it could be very difficult, because suddenly you're not letting people come into the kitchen, particularly when there's anaphylactics in staying, and you're paranoid that somebody could get seriously ill. So for me, it was always really important to give people what they wanted, though, you know, and you know, they're getting a private chef, and they're paying a lot of money for that, and they need to be looked after, and you know, and to the best of your ability. And often, like, they would say they were gluten-free or dairy-free, and then you'd see them, you know, tucking into a cake in the local cafe, and you're like, oh! But you know what? That wasn't my job. I wasn't going to be the gluten-free, dairy-free police.
But you were getting an eclectic mix of people with so many varied needs. And I personally, I could have seen just putting a potato on a plate and handing it to them, you know.
Yeah, no, they did have varying needs, and some of them were easy, and some of them were more tricky. But ultimately, it's whatever the client wants. Like in any business, actually, it's like, you know, they're paying for it, and you give them what they want. And they usually loved it, though, because in Lismore Castle, we were above the Blackwater, so they'd get fresh salmon from the river. They get their meat from our local butcher, which has their own farm and abattoir. Nearly all the vegetables came from the walled garden in Lismore Castle. So actually, straight away, you're kind of on a win-win with them, because they were, you know, often like just blown away by the deliciousness of what they were getting. So it wasn't that I was cooking with, 3 ingredients every day that I had to turn into something supersonic. So I was really lucky, and they for the most part, they were fantastic, and they loved everything, so it was great.
You were also involved in catering. In a catering company, was that more for private or was it more en masse?
Well, it was a smaller event. So my company was called Amuse Bouche, and it was smaller events. And, I think probably the largest event was maybe, I don't know, maybe 500 or 600 people. But yeah, that was great as well. And I love that. Again, it's the same kind of concept. Like, it's whatever people want. You go, you meet them, you talk about the menus, you talk about, what they want, and then you organize the crew and everything. And I absolutely loved that as well, because there's, I'm a crammer at heart, and I think all chefs are crammers at heart.
Right.
So I'm a good, I love that adrenaline then that you get from, when everything goes nuts in work, for example. I'm the person that can handle it because I'm that crammer person. I'm like, no problem, I've got it, boom, 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 and I'm on fire and alive. And so catering, chefing, all those moments for me were quite joyful, even though they were really difficult, because I love the fact that you had to really multitask and really start thinking clearly in those moments. So I loved it, and I still love that in work, where my 2 partners, Ken and Owen, are much more slowly steady, win the race, and every day they'll just be really diligent and really methodical. And I kind of, I'm not as good at that part as them, but then when things are really on fire, I'm like, okay, I'm on. So
it must have been interesting. I mean, from managing sort of fine dining for a small group to catering en masse. I mean, the skill sets around that are the same but different, if you know what I mean. And
they definitely are.
Yeah, and having to manage it, and also to manage a team around that to make sure it's delivered.
Yeah, 100%. And your team need to, you need to be really clear, and really sure-footed, and you need to have it, like, depending on what size the event is, you need to have, like, sometimes you could just manage it as one person managing it, but actually more often than not, I was also cooking, within that and managing it. So, you need to have a couple of people around you then who are also really strong, so that there's a core team who know what's going on, and they can kind of make sure that the others are. Because often they're, if you think about those typical events, the waiters and waitresses might be younger, and so they need to be very much directed, and they need to look the part, they need to act the part, they need to make sure it's done with finesse. And so, yeah, I mean, but again, I loved it. And then often, you find that, because you've been in contact with the people who are having the event, they want to chat to you in the middle of it for a half an hour, and you're like, I really want to chat to you. Like, there's 25 things going on over, so that was always the hardest bit, actually, that I was like, this is really lovely. Can we postpone this chat till tomorrow? Because you just know that there's a million things in ovens and everything going on. And so that was, for me, that was the most challenging bit, actually. And they just want to chat and say, this is great, isn't this wonderful? And you're like, but I always thought it was really funny. It's like when people talk to you when you're running an event or running a kitchen, when people come into you, they don't realize that it's like coming into your office, and you're busy in your office day. They're just shooting the breeze, and you're like, I'm kind of technically at my desk here, but people don't see it that way. So that was, for me, always the most challenging piece.
That's quite interesting, because people don't realize that actually they're distracting you from giving them even better service. So, so go away, I'll talk to you later. No, it's fascinating. I mean, obviously you found something you love, but both sides of the brain are obviously functioning here. Then you've got the creativity, but also the sort of organizational skills needed to deliver.
Yeah, I suppose I do. And it's interesting because, organization wouldn't have been a strong point of mine. But when you cook and you cater, you've got to be super sonically organized, because you have so many things to bring. And if your event is 2 hours away and you forget something, it's a nightmare.
Yes, of course.
So you have to be really, really good at organizing your team. So it was really interesting for me to learn that I was able to do that too. But yeah, and I think, lists, as anybody who's organized will tell you, lists are really important. And double checking, and then having a good team around you, right? He'll double check your list, make sure so I had a couple of really great people on my team.
But this journey was to prepare you for where you are now and how that started off. Tell our listeners how that started, the Lismore Food Company, and how you are
Yeah.
and where you are today and what you're doing.
Well, so basically I mean, as I said, my background is steeped in food. I was, born loving food, after 6 generations of people in food. And I, as I said, I went back to Ballymaloe and did all the chefing stuff. But then I realized, there was something missing. After years of all of this, I just needed to step up a business level. So I loved the creativity, but it wasn't enough business. And I suppose there's always been two sides to my brain in terms of the way I recognize it. And that the creative one, which is the one I really let go in my 30s when I did my chefing, but I wasn't doing enough business stuff, and so I had time on my hands as well. So there was a couple of months in the winter when it was quiet in January and February, and I was twiddling my thumbs, going, my son was at school, so I wasn't minding a small child anymore in the daytime. And I was like, I just need to do something. And so at that point, I started, myself and Ken particularly first started chatting about bringing a product to market,
Right.
and what we could do, and what kind of product we could bring. And we worked for a couple of years before we kind of nailed it. But it was absolutely an amazing time. And then, of course, starting that, we at the start, we made everything from scratch ourselves. Now we outsource all production, but we made everything. We designed all the packaging. We did every single thing. And we still do a lot of the stuff. We still do all the packaging design and everything else. But we spent a couple of years, and we had a few setbacks in that time, and kind of came back to the drawing board again, and finally we got there, and it was so exciting to bring a new product to the market. And I just remember when the packaging first arrived, which I have here. Mm-hmm. That's the packaging.
Fantastic.
And we launched with our sweet biscuit range, and we were so thrilled to see something that you have had in your brain become a real life product and go onto a shelf is the most unbelievable feeling. So that was incredible.
Let's talk about the challenges of this. I mean, you've picked a product range that you want to get involved, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, would have an interest in food and how you get into it. Where was the starting point? I mean, how did you pick what you wanted to do, and how did you decide how to market that into the particular sector?
So again, that's a really interesting thought, right? Because we did, at the start, we didn't know. We were like, what can we do? But we knew that we were coming at it with a tiny pot of money. So we couldn't throw a lot of money at something. We knew that we wanted to produce everything ourselves, which we did for a long time, not for a long time, for about 4 or 5 months. And we knew that it had to have shelf life. So we were there, I was in Lismore Castle making afternoon tea as part of my thing, going, what could we do, as I was rolling out biscuits every day. And then we realized it was like biscuits would be an amazing thing to do, because after looking at various other products, because we knew that we could make them, and we knew they'd be delicious.
Yeah.
We knew they'd have shelf life, and I remember again, and going back to Ballymaloe for a second, I remember years before I did the course in Ballymaloe, I was there for a little short course, and I had their biscuits, and I had never tasted any biscuit like that in my life. I was like, this is not like biscuit you get in the shop, or maybe I was even younger than that, but I just remember the taste was very different, and we wanted to make those biscuits, not just any biscuits, like beautiful biscuits that are simply made, that are just like exceptionally good. So we decided that we would do that. And then we wanted to present them in a way, like we didn't want something that was going to be in the multiples straight away for 39p kind of thing. Like that wasn't a market that we could play in for a start. But it was also not a market that we were interested in. So I think at the time, the most expensive biscuit you could get in Ireland was something like €2.50. And we brought these out for €6.50 in these beautiful tubes. And
wow.
I remember my brother, who at the time was in Musgrave, said, this is crazy, you're mad. And loads of people said to us that we were mad. And we were like, well, we don't think so, actually. And it turned out we essentially created a new category of biscuit, because there weren't biscuit. They were in London and in Paris and other places. You can get them like this, but you couldn't in Ireland. and people responded really well because they're such a beautiful gift, actually, and you know, they're beautifully wrapped. So I think that it's not just a biscuit that you were buying. It's a moment and an experience and a gift and whatever else. And it's very hard to find something beautiful to gift to somebody for under 10 euros that's wrapped and ready to go, right? So I think we hit a moment, and it was when the recession was just beginning to turn around. I feel like if we had launched a year before, it wouldn't have worked.
Yes.
But people were just spinning around at that moment and just ready for, you know, the economy started going back up and people were ready to spend a little bit more. And so we were very fortunate as well with our time.
I suppose what we have is about 2 minutes left. I'd like to know, there we go. It just goes that quickly. Tell me what next for the Lismore Food Company, and where do you see yourself in a year's time? I know you've got through COVID, and we could talk for a whole show about that alone, but what next? You've come through COVID.
So we've come through COVID. In fact, we had 12 products this time last year, and now we have 50 something products. So we've launched now a range of other pantry products, so preserves, chocolates, wines, cordials, and lots of other things, and lots of hamper products. And we really want to build on that. So really, we aim to be the most beautiful premium food company in Ireland, and we want to be kind of the Fortnum and Mason of Ireland, if you like, and that's the direction that we're going in, and we're very excited. So our business COVID has transformed our business in an amazing way, because we had the space to look on our business and to to make it better, to kind of to look from afar and to go, what's gonna be good for our business. And we've had it's people have been so supportive, and it's been amazing. And the trajectory is very much going in a nice upward direction, which is wonderful. So yes, creating products that are complementary to our current product range. But we have a lot of gorgeous products now, and just adding more to our list would be fantastic.
So, in a sentence, where can people find out more about you?
Well, the lismorefoodcompany.com is our website, and everything's on there. And we're also on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And obviously our products then are in all good food halls and stores all through the country.